Okay, why don't we get started now? So again, I guess thank you everybody for your patience in terms of, it is now 10:02 a.m. Eastern Standard. And thank you to everyone actually for joining us for this webinar from ContractPodAi. Today, we are going to be discussing how a global crisis changed the way we view change. So there has been a lot of change on everybody's mind with the whole COVID crisis that's hitting us at the moment. And again, we're taking a look at how is this impacting legal, specifically legal teams, and then is there anything that we can do about this, which is the other really, really important topic. So this session is being recorded. If there are any questions, please do kind of throw them into the Q&A section. So there should be a question and answer button on your screen someplace. Hopefully everybody's able to see the screen. Do send me a note if that's not the case. But I think that we're good. And with that, why don't we get rolling? So first of all, my name is Charles Dimov. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at ContractPodAi. Been around for a little while, so about 24 years in marketing. I've done sales, engineering, management across a lot of different IT industry, technologies, etc. So that is me. And if I might also introduce Derek. Derek?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Derek Harpel with ContractPodAi. I haven't been around nearly as long as Charles, but Charles, you still look younger than me, so kudos to you. Yeah, I'm a former attorney, licensed to practice in the state of California, and about 10 or so years ago moved into the tech side of the legal industry. So happy to be here with all of you today.
All right, welcome, Derek. So this morning, what we're going to focus on are a couple of different things. We are going to talk a little bit about the state of the world today. Hard to avoid. It's almost like in every conversation that we have these days, isn't it? And how does this affect legal specifically? I think that's a really important topic. I mean, of course, everybody's working remotely, everybody's working digitally. And again, we want to take a look at that impact and how do we deal with that effectively. Certainly, it goes beyond force majeure. I know that that's been the hot topic of the day. And from our angle, I mean, we've looked at this from the lens of saying, hey, you know, we've had a number of clients who we've started talking with that it's been rather interesting to hear how their CLM, so the contract lifecycle management system, has affected them, their teams, and their productivity. And in fact, we are releasing a series that's going to be talking about just that over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that as well. Then we get into a little bit of digital transformation and adoption, and then implementation. What does that look like from your schedule? Is it still an option? So let me just get started with the state of the world today. So I don't think I have to remind everybody, I mean, you know what, border closings are normal now. I mean, can you imagine, like about 2 months ago, you wouldn't have even thought about this. I was, oh gosh, I think my travel schedule was just insane. And I think I spent like maybe a week, a month kind of in my own city. And most of the time I was on flights. And this is just completely unimaginable. Border closings, travel bans, limited supplies. You know, unfortunately, very, very regrettably, a lot of layoffs are happening. We are definitely in a recession at the moment, and that looks like it's a very unsure times. Take a look at this. This is from March 11th. This is the day that the pandemic was declared. And it's kind of funny to reflect on this. When I look at this, this almost looks like an optimistic picture saying, wow, can you imagine at that time we thought it was pretty serious. And now when we look back, I think we have just a few days ago surpassed 2 million people with the COVID virus who have actually been declared with COVID virus. So who knows how many people actually have it. And again, very, very scary times. We've certainly noticed that the mortality rate has gone up, and the impact on law has been that, well, we've all, in the corporate sector, we've all been working from home a lot. Now, the scary implication as well is that this is truly, truly deeply uncertain time. And the question comes, you know, I think a lot of folks are kind of thinking, you know, if you're a GC, for example, your perspective has been, hey, look, I have allowed my folks to work from home. That's actually been mandated. That's important. The governments have kind of encouraged that. Everybody should be going into self-isolation. We're all working from our apartments or from our home bases. And that's fine. And we're doing our part. That's absolutely important. Now, the critical part is, you know, are people as effective? Is a legal team as effective when they're working from their home office as they would be when they're kind of in a cluster, in a group at the office itself? I think a lot of companies would say no. The inclination is to say, nope, that's not the case. We have a lot of physical files. We have a lot of, there's a lot to law in terms of just meeting face to face for a quick little discussion saying, hey, Bob, do you remember blah, blah, blah. Those are important little interactions. We have to work a little bit differently now. So we are using the, technology a little bit more differently, maybe video broadcasting, et cetera. Important. Now, I think a lot of companies are and a lot of GCs are thinking of this as, this is a one-time event. It's a crisis. Yes, I know, I understand, and it's going to pass. And once it passes, we're all going to go back to normal and we're all going to go back to the office, and that's all fine. Now, the scary thing is, in the paper that we'll be sending out to everybody, I kind of took a look at some research from a flu from a couple of years ago. So many of you are going to remember the swine flu. It kind of hit the world back in 2008, 2009. And the swine flu, when I specifically looked at the graph for the UK, that was interesting because what you see on the right there was a big spike of incidence of the swine flu in the UK around the July timeframe, and then it dies off in August, September, October. And then frankly, you would have just sort of thought, okay, well, it's done, it's over, we're past it, ta-da. And then they get hit again in November. So again, it rises from October to November timeframe. So there's a second wave. And the question right now, and I think that the media is starting to talk about this more and more, is that the whole COVID thing seems to be taking a lot longer. There is, this sense that maybe this is going to take until we have a vaccine, and that could be a year off, et cetera. Those are scary scenarios. Or another scenario is very much like what this picture paints, which is, will this be coming in multiple waves? Now, the implication is, how is this going to affect legal? It basically means two things. One is, it means that our teams probably are going to be working from home a lot longer than we were expecting. It's not just a matter of hunker down and kind of, survive this for the next month or two and then we all go back to business. Probably not. It's probably going to be either we're going to be in phases of these isolation periods, or that we're going to have a long phase of this isolation period, or who knows what alternative there is. Scary scenarios, but the main point is you've got to have your team being able to deal with this possibly on a prolonged basis, or even on a multifold basis. That's the implication. And are you ready for this? And even if you're not, what can you do to get ready for this? I think is even the more important question. So how's it affecting legal today? I mean, I don't have to express it. Many of you are already experiencing this. So given that we're in this recession, now the whole question about, let's see, what did that contract say with that particular supplier? What if they're not delivering? But then this is kind of an act of God. This is a force majeure. Is that covered in the contract, yes or no? It's great if you've got all of this digitized. The problem is, what if it's sitting on your desk at the office? Because you had a paper copy, but you didn't actually have a digitized copy. That's the issue. And of course, when are you going to have these issues? These issues don't happen normally during great times when things are booming. These issues tend to happen when we have a recession, when we have difficult times, when we're going through a crisis. That's where you really, really need digital technology, mostly. And the very interesting question is, we asked a very simple question on a survey that we released the research on about 2 months ago. And we found that 62% of organizations are still using manual methods for their contract management. So in other words, only 38% of organizations, and the organizations we asked to participate in the survey were doing 500 million plus in revenue annually. So these aren't tiny little companies. It's not somebody who's not prepared. You actually would expect that they probably have a pretty good process, except that they didn't have a CLM. They were doing this, through Excel, et cetera. Now, I think digital is a no-brainer. I mean, what do you think, Derek?
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, if it ever was before, it certainly is now. Going digital and working from home is obviously a requirement now. And so in that same recent study that we did, I know 40% or 48% of companies have not even evaluated or considered a contract lifecycle management in over 4 years. And so as we're talking, Charles, about going digital, and specifically you mentioned about that 62% of respondents still using manual methods, as you said, these are not small companies. These are some companies that have 20 to 40,000 active contracts at any given moment. And so since we don't have that pleasure of being in the office and saying, hey, Charles, can you, email me that contract, or can you hand that to me or so. We have to now get with the times. And so we need to start thinking about what is working from home, what is digital. Yes, it's a no-brainer, but what does this mean? How is this going to affect your operations on a day-to-day level? How are we going to be able to access our contract databases? And of course, digital access is going to allow our legal teams to be productive anywhere in the world, at any time. And that's going to be so key right now. And of course, going forward. So really important to accept the idea that, yes, we need to go digital. We are probably going to be working from home for a little while now. So let's start thinking about some of these questions.
Mm.
And so the next thing, of course, is assessing the contractual impacts of all of this. So 56% of corporate counsel offices regularly analyze their contract performance. And that's kind of a low number if you sort of think about it. I think it's important. We need to think about what provisions we have in place. So force majeure, of course, Charles, is the obvious one that everyone has in their mind, how folks are not able to perform their legal obligations. But it's more than that. During a crisis, the legal team really needs to spend some serious time understanding the contractual impacts of this current situation and potential future pandemics. Understanding what our obligations are either to our partners and what obligations are owed to us. If we're able to perform those obligations, and if not, what liabilities and indemnities are at stake. And then what delayed or liquidated damages are involved. And of course, you know, other than the macabre sort of death that goes on with all this is the tragic job loss situation that will often happen, and folks need to understand termination provisions and so on. And so this is not just looking at numbers and figures. There's definitely a human element to this, and the legal team really needs to get ahead and understanding what these contractual impacts are going to be.
That's a good point. And so, Derek, can I just ask a question? There was one question that came in from an anonymous, one of the attendees, and they're asking, what is the legal implication that most GCs are worried about right now? And you mentioned force majeure. Now you're out in the field of, well, okay, maybe these days you're a little bit more in the house, but still, you're talking to a lot of GCs on a fairly regular basis. Is there anything else aside from force majeure which you've started hearing?
Well, you know, I think GCs are a lot like the rest of us. You know, I can say probably in the past month up until maybe this week, it was just initial shock. And it was that first shock. And then let's say that second half of that first month was about employment. And now, and understanding their employees, obligations to employees and so on. Now I think it's really becoming a little bit more macro, Charles. It's understanding the business on a bigger level, understanding those numbers, and really starting to see how is this going to affect economic performance for the business. So perhaps that's sort of a therapeutic way to deal with it, just really getting deep into numbers when all this sort of human impact is going on at the same time. But we're seeing an interesting switch from that immediate shock to employment situations to really now getting that granularity of those obligations and understanding the finances that are involved in all this. So it's becoming a little bit more on a macro level. It's interesting to see that evolution, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, the other thing that actually kind of occurs to me while we looking at that slide, the graph specifically, talking about 56% of corporate counsel offices regular analyze contract performance. And I was recently talking to, in fact, it was one of your clients a little while ago that I just happened to be chatting with the head of contract management at that organization. And she recounted a very interesting story. She was telling me that there was, you know, at one of the companies she was working at, the CEO had basically come to her and said, hey, look, we're having this challenge with this particular clause. I want you to get the team on this right away. I really need the answer to this. Look through all of our contracts and tell me how many times does this clause come up? So how many of our contracts have this, whatever the liability was, or the, you know, whatever the scenario was. And so she said, great. So she jumps on this right away. She basically stops the entire team from doing whatever they were doing and says, this is top priority. We got to get the answer. They worked for, you know, a couple of weeks. It sounded like about a month. So 3 to 4 weeks on this, looking through every single contract that the company had, finally gets the answer, tallies it all up, gets the stats, goes over to the CEO. We're talking about 3 to 4 weeks later, and because of course they were doing everything manually there, and she kind of reports back to the CEO saying, well, here's how many times this particular clause was in our contracts. This is the net result out of it. This is the impact, the implication. Here's how much risk there is. And the CEO in this case kind of looked at her with this complete blank look on his face and kind of shrugged and said, why are you telling me this? By this point, he had completely forgotten that he had asked. The issue, I guess it passed. The sense of urgency had already passed long ago. And she was left with this feeling like, oh my God, really? I just spent like practically a month of the entire department's time and resources to look up the answer, and you didn't, this is it. Which actually kind of tells you as well that that's the pains of going through on a non-digital process without a powerful CLM, without the AI. I mean, we were implementing an AI-based, basically analytics engine for her, and she was so excited. The idea that maybe in a couple of hours, or if they had a lot of contracts, maybe a day or two, that she might actually have the answer to go with, and her feeling was just going to change her world, which again, very interesting anecdote. Where the
well, I remember you sharing that story when that happened, and of course we see that all the time, and that was during, dare I say, the good old days.
Right.
Things now are moving faster and changing faster than ever, unfortunately, of course. Yeah. And it makes, your point is, like we said, those were during the good old days. Now people don't have that luxury of taking the time because the consequences are so imminent, they're so immediate. And so however folks are doing things, they have to take it so seriously because it really impacts everyone's life and the business and so on. So again, we don't have months now. Everything is now down to real granular periods of time. Yeah, so obviously let's think about how do you get digital? And how do you transition from a very manual analog process to your contract management to a software that's really going to be there for you during good times and bad? So there are many complementary solutions that are highly specialized in certain types of contracts and certain types of industries. But I think what most companies now are really looking for is an end-to-end solution. And an end-to-end solution is really going to help a business with their entire contract process. And so that includes migrating all those legacy contracts into a full centralized single contract repository where they can run these smart summaries leveraging artificial intelligence and natural language processing, not only on those individual contracts, but on all of their contracts. And as I mentioned earlier, folks now are starting to try to understand what are these sort of macro repercussions that we're going through right now. Those smart summaries and the AI analytics are so key right now. And so that full end-to-end solution is not only going to give you that data, but it's also going to speed up leveraging contract automation. It's going to speed up your contract generation process. And a good end-to-end solution is also going to integrate with other solutions like an e-signature solution or Salesforce or other negotiation solutions and so on. And I think even more key now is the ability to design workflows to make sure that whenever we're requesting contracts or we've received a third-party contract, to ensure that that contract is flowing to the right department and to the right person. And that contract may need to be reviewed by someone across the world in a different time zone. Charles, I don't have time to review a contract and then review it and say, I'm going to send this over to Carla, who's out in Paris right now, and hopefully she'll get it and she'll review it while I'm sleeping. And of course, I'll wake up in the morning and she'll not have reviewed it and so on. So again, we don't have that luxury anymore. So creating those workflows is going to allow those contracts to immediately flow to the appropriate department, the appropriate person, and give those alerts to that person so that they can start working on things much faster and much more efficiently and effectively.
And Derek, just before we jump off this section, actually another question came in, which is very, very much on this, which is what features are part of a CLM would you have seen as being the most helpful at this particular time? So does like, I mean, that's a nice little feature list. Does anything kind of jump out at you as saying, well, you know what, most people are going to need this, or most legal teams are going to need this as a primary?
Yep. Without a doubt, it's the analytics. You know, it's Charles, as we talk to folks day in and day out, managing contracts is not always the most fun thing. It's certainly not the sexiest thing on earth, that it can be a challenge. Now, going even deeper than that, not only managing contracts, but managing the obligations in all of those contracts. What obligations are owed to the business, and what obligations does the business owe to its business partners? And a lot of times it's a very siloed experience. HR handles their contracts, therefore they handle all of their obligations. Sales handles their contracts, therefore they own all of their obligations. A general counsel's office doesn't really then have that full visibility and insight if all of these obligations and all these contracts are being tracked really individually. So it is so key in order to give the business that full insight and that full visibility into the health of the business by running those analytics. And it can be as simple as a few clicks of a button just to find out what are all my obligations in all my contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so second to that would be the other thing that I mentioned about workflows, you know, because we are now in different time zones, we're working all separately, trying to work together, but somewhat separately. And those workflows will help speed up some of this process. So definitely the analytics. After that, I would say secondly is those workflows.
Super, that's great, thank you.
Yep, so how long is this gonna take? You know, implementing any software can be a challenge for people and lawyers, and I can say this because I am one myself. We can be a little bit of, you know, part-time Luddites. We're not always quick to adopt software sometimes. It's just the nature of sometimes who we are. And 64% of survey respondents believe it will take a year to adopt an artificial intelligence-based contract management solution. Now, that's a startling number, but it's not far off in a way that I will actually share with a quick anecdote. I recently spoke to a company that told me that they had looked at a contract management solution where the implementation was going to take anywhere from 12 to 24 months to set it up.
Wow, they should have a vaccine by then.
I should have a vaccine by then. And there's gonna be a whole new technology back then. I mean, I think you and I can even admit, you know, a year ago when we were in this company, AI was probably something very different than it is today. And certainly another 12 months from now, it's gonna be very different. So the technology is evolving, the world is evolving. No one has time to wait 12 to 24 months to use a software. And by the way, I should let you know, that company, when they were looking at that software, they had to pay for the solution, by the way, during that implementation period, that 12 to 24 months, and they couldn't even use it. So imagine you have to pay for something that you can't use. I mean, how frustrating can that be? So I think it's really key to look for a solution that's going to work with your timeline, and particularly out-of-box solutions that can really be up to speed in a very quick period of time. So for example, ContractPodAi, typically, our implementation processes were really customizing and really, configuring the solution and really getting all the different pieces together. That typically about 3 months, and that is extremely competitive. But we, of course, have an out-of-the-box solution that's operational within as little as 2 to 5 weeks. So whatever the best solution is for that particular company, when you're looking at vendors, just make sure that implementation time is something you can work with. I mean, you know, someone once said to me, it's like receiving a Christmas gift that you can't open until June, you know, and that's you know, that's competitive. Again, there are some CLM solutions that, like I said, can be 12 to 24 months for implementation. And that for a lot of companies is not going to work, particularly in this climate.
That's pretty good. I mean, given that, you know, like if everybody's in this work from home scenario, we don't know how long this is going to last. So that actually might be a good solution, just to be able to kind of, if you don't have something, to get up and operational fast while this continues to take its toll, I suppose, on us. Interesting.
Yeah, and because time is no longer a luxury, you really need that support from your contract management solution provider. So, and I just think that is really key and necessary. So as folks are thinking about this, make sure you've got a provider that's going to support you during that process, however long it takes.
Right.
So, how do you start your digital transformation? I know for many lawyers that can sound like a scary concept, but 75% of global executives believe that AI is critical to their company's future in the next 5 years. So that means folks need to start thinking about things pretty quickly. 5 years is right around the corner. Time moves quickly. So undertaking a digital transformation shouldn't be scary or excessively difficult. It doesn't have to be. I know sometimes folks think it is, but it doesn't. And I think if you lean into it, you can find that it doesn't have to be as challenging as sometimes folks think it is. So 3 main steps, and we'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but understanding, I think in terms of this order, understanding, so your scorecard is going to understand your current state assessment. Outcomes is really understanding your ideal objectives and KPIs, and then laying out a blueprint. So how do you go from your current state to those necessary outcomes? So let's dive deeper perhaps into each of those. So your scorecard, like I said, understanding where you are in your current state. It's super important. And now is as best a time as any to really understand where you are digitally as an organization. Is your digital transformation, is it at the beginning, early stage, early development? Is it at a mature phase, and so on? So understand that about yourself. Have that, that understanding about where you are as a business. And then how much of your contract management processes are digital? How much of them are manual? And how much of those manual processes can you digitize? So that's really understanding that scorecard, getting a sense of the layout of the land of where you are. Next, of course, is those outcomes, understanding your ideal objectives and KPIs, and understanding those contract management KPIs. What are they? And your vendor should, or your provider should help you to understand what some of those may be. And think too, kind of fantasize there. What's your ideal state when it comes to your legal functions? Why are you doing this? Why do you need to think about going digital, particularly when it comes to contract management? What would you like to see? And discuss that in a sort of therapeutic way with anyone that you're talking with. Get a sense of what you want those outcomes to look like. What would your dream look like? And then find that provider that's going to help meet those needs and those expectations. The next thing, of course, would then be to lay out that blueprint, get a sense of your current state, those necessary outcomes, and then map out that future vision. So it's not enough just to think about it, you gotta write it out and share that with your colleagues. And then all of you guys think about, develop those use cases, and even folks in contract management should be able to help provide you some of those use cases. But I think it's really important as you're getting the sense of where you are in your digital transformation, what those use cases might look like specifically to your business. And then, of course, after you've done that thinking, it's time to get to work and start implementing your legal digital transformation plan. Of course, with the support of your provider, but really key to think about those 3 steps in order to have a successful future in going digital.
That's great. Now, if I might jump in, so if anybody would like to learn a little bit more, in fact, this entire conversation was really very much largely based on a white paper that we had published a few weeks ago, in fact, so it's fairly hot off the press, Contract Management Crisis Preparedness for GCs. And it is there. In fact, you can download it at that little bit.ly that we've got there, bit.ly/crisisprep. Or frankly, we are going to actively send out to everybody who's participated in the webinar. We're going to send out a copy directly, so you don't have to actually do anything. We'll get it emailed to you. But again, if you do want to get to that before we email it out to you, then please go to that bit.ly. It's there for yours. It is for free, of course. One of the neat things there as well is we've kind of touched on a couple of different elements of, how to make your legal team a little bit more productive, efficient, and impactful out in the field at this point in time while we're going through something like this, which is a crisis. And part of that research, in fact, we did include a little checklist to say, if you're in the process where you're going to be looking for a CLM, and a CLM is a good answer for you, then a contract lifecycle management system, then this little checklist just gives you some ideas in terms of maybe these are some of the things that you should really look for in the system. We're not saying that, maybe ours might be your solution or might not be, but the point is at least take a look at these. These are neutral and just sort of gives you a perspective of saying, hey, there are a couple of points that actually I do have to think about because they pertain to my company. So again, use that checklist. It's there for your, for your use. The other thing as well is we had published about a month ago or two, we did some research, and a lot of these stats that you saw earlier on in this discussion were based on that research. That's the Corporate Council Employment of Technology research. So again, it is there. It's at that bit.ly that we're at the bottom of the screen there, bit.ly/Corp Council Research. Go there and you'll be taken right to the page. In which case you could just download that for yourself as well if you wanted to see the full research and all the other stats in there as well, just to see how do you maybe kind of compare to the rest of the industry, for example. Now, I'll open it up also for other questions. Oh, there is actually a question. So another question did come in, and the question is, how can you report, how can you report various scenarios, impacts of a crisis such as this to your senior management?
It's a great question. Yeah. I started, sorry, I was paying attention to what you were showing on these last few slides, but I saw this question come in and when I was thinking about it, it's a great question. And if you don't mind, I'll jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know that there's necessarily a one surefire way to make sure that you're going to report something and then the senior management's going to love what you have to say. I think the key thing, of course, is first of all, how do you report it to anyone else? You got to get the information. You got to get the data first. Have the ability to report on all of those key obligations. And it's not just the obligations in a legal sense, but the financial impacts, what revenue and expenses are going in and out of the business. So I think perhaps a great way would be understand, almost break things down in a sense by clauses, so to speak. Which clauses do we expect to be most impacted? Obviously force majeure, but take a look at some of your suppliers and your vendors who may really be critically impacted. Where are those big dollars, whether they're going into the business or out of the business, and contact those folks and say, hey, we know we've got a big deal with you that's supposed to be performed, by June, how are things coming along? And try to get ahead of it. And I think having that open and honest communication with your business partners is going to really be key. So I think getting those reports, seeing where those big numbers, reaching out to those folks, and then presenting the information, obviously, with a variety of different scenarios. And the only way that you can really create those different various scenarios and impacts are going to be having that reporting functionality where you can kind of tweak where things may go and where things may not go. So I think that's the best approach to some degree. And obviously just getting that information and communicating is the way to solve any problem, so to speak. But having that granular information will allow you to have those deeper conversations that are going to be a little bit more meaningful, where you're not having them in the abstract. Obviously, we are living in a very sort of abstract academic world right now because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going on. But if you can understand that we've got a business deal that's worth, $1 million and it's set to be effective by June, well, you might want to start having conversations as soon as possible. So that would be my approach to that scenario.
That's great. That's a good answer. So thank you, Derek. And again, we are open to any other questions. If I'll give it another moment or so. Either go into the question and answer area or just unmute your mic and ask away. Okay, well, it looks like we have got to the end of our questions. So again, I'll just remind everybody, we will be sending out the contingency planning for GCs report. That will be going out to everybody who's attended this webinar. So thank you very much to all of our attendees. Do also download the research if that's interesting to you, or ping us or let us know, and we'll get you a copy of that as well. It is very interesting research, some neat stats on the industry in terms of what legal, where our mind space is at, and what people are kind of doing actively in the business. And with that, I would also like to thank Derek for co-hosting this today. Thanks so much for your input and your insights on this. It was great to hear some of the stories and your perspective on things as well. Again, with that, I'd also like to, again, thank everybody for attending, and we will see you on the next podcast.
Thanks, everyone. Please stay safe, everyone.